Crater Lake, Kelly?
Oh, jeez. Wow. It's being stretched. Oh, maybe not Adams.
Emily's going to have to tell us where these are. Oh, this is.
Oh, oh, I wish I was there.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Big guy.
Hi everyone, welcome tonight to Mindful Steps. We'll just wait for a few more minutes while folks join, but thank you so much for joining in, and hope you enjoy some photos along the way as we wait for some folks to join.
Emily, will you tell us where things are?
Well, these are a collection of photos from those who've submitted, but I also was able to get my husband Stuart to contribute some photos as well, so I can tell some of those.
Where's this?
That is, I think, somewhere in the Cascades. I'm not quite sure where. That one, not a good one to start.
Was this from your Devil's Dome trip? Judging
Yes.
by the slope?
I'm thinking so.
I'm thinking you're looking across Lake Ross Lake.
This is actually Susha Island. Christy sent us a photo to include in the presentation. She's not able to attend tonight.
Nice.
They're a little dark today.
That is from a view from Mount Stewart. Our two Viking gurus there, not without Sarah.
Hearts Pass or
Skyline Divide.
uh,
Ozette Peninsula. Mount Baker.
oh, this is this amazing one with
The Enchantments.
Still not hearing any words. And there's no picture. Is this on? The camera?
Also
Camera's
before.
not on.
How do you turn it on?
I don't know. I just,
Well, you can hear you.
this is Zoom. I know how to do it. I mean, I don't know what you've done here.
I haven't done anything. Oh, there we go. Okay.
This is Linda.
Kelly, it was right
Hard to
clever
measure.
that you got these animals to walk through so you could take pictures of them.
Maybe you don't care.
I do care. Look at this. These are great. These are Emily's pictures.
Oh, the others too have contributed. So
They're Emily's.
Stuart.
Oh, well, same thing, Emily. How'd you do that?
Okay, just a minute more. All right, let's let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining today on behalf of the Creation Care Committee and the Faith Formation Committee. We're so glad that you're here and excited to get to talk about our beautiful Pacific Northwest. First, though, let's start with a word of prayer. I'm going to turn that to Todd.
Good evening, everybody. Awakening in a moment of peace, I give thanks to the source of all peace. As I set forth into the day, the birds sing with new voices, and I listen with new ears and give thanks. Nearby, the flower called Angel's Trumpet blows in the breeze, and I give thanks. My feet touch the grass, still wet with dew, and I give thanks. Both to my Mother Earth for sustaining my steps, and to the seas cycling once again to bring forth new life. The dewdrops become jeweled with the morning sunfire, and I give thanks.
This Zoom.
You can see forever when the vision is clear. In this moment, each moment,
How about up
I
here?
give thanks.
Camera?
Thank you, Todd. And just as we gather tonight, if you could go
You want to let me
on
sit there for a minute, Hazy?
if you could go on mute and just hit mute, and that way we can have pause and then jump in when you have a question or comment. So just a little bit about the evening tonight. So I'm going to share a few words, and then we're going to have a breakout or a warm-up session of a question, and then get to hear from some great panelists on their views, literally their views of their movement in nature, and then have a breakout group, and then come back together and share a little bit about what we learned from each other, and then get some really good next steps and action about how we can, well, I say prepare for winter
That's
game
unmuting
plan
us.
in a pandemic in nature. So go ahead and get started with that. So I wanted to share these words from Wendell Berry's poem, Grace. Running or walking, the way is the same. Be still, be still. He moves your bones and the way is clear. These words from Wendell Berry's poem really speak to me because they connect movement with stillness. As the subject in the poem, as you read on, explores this forest setting. And I am really struck by this image of movement with stillness. When we first moved to Seattle, my husband and I, many friends and family questioned whether we could just make it here because of the rain, because we were very active and we like to be outside and moving. And because it just never stops raining in Seattle all the time, they just were really worried that we weren't going to be active like we enjoyed in Atlanta. And I laughed because now I feel like we're more active than ever. We just have more activities to put in our toolkit, but we also have more types of rain gear. Like I've never had different levels of rain gear before, where it's like sprinkles, showers, rain, that dictates like how I'm going to go out if I'm active that day. But it was actually on Mount Rainier when we first moved here, and I was wearing my first official like waterproof rain jacket that actually did its job. Not just one that you can, wear in the rain, that I realized that a marmot was not just the name of my new jacket, but it was actually an animal, and it was staring at me right on the trail. And I didn't know that it was an animal or what it looked like or the sound that it made. And I got to have that connection that truly it's more than just what I'm wearing. But movement has always been integral for me for finding these moments of stillness that Berry talks about. When I move in nature, I can literally feel the shift in my body and being more present and aware of what's around me. And I can feel my thoughts to slow down. I'm not planning a million scenarios of different situations. I'm more open to surprise. And I notice a lot more details around me. That can look like sizing the wingspan of the eagle while I'm running, or counting the seals on the rocks while we're walking down the beach. It can just be running on the Fremont Ridge and looking up to see this incredible sunrise behind St. Mark's and thinking of someone to pray for. It can be pushing past exhaustion after another switchback just to feel the Cascades wrap completely around you when you get to the summit. This summer, I've had the opportunity to have some really great email threads with people about outdoor activities. And in one, with Andy Vallis, one of the panelists today, I learned about a flower called the mountain bog gentian. I hope I'm saying that right. But this tiny purple bloom caught our attention on a recent hike, and I'm still learning my wildflower vocabulary. And so my husband bent down and just took this photo of the little bloom, and we both agreed that we were going to ask Andy and Nancy in this group of what it was, you know, not just using the wildflower app, because it's fun to learn that way. And what Andy shared with me really struck me. Andy said that it must be a mountain bog gentian because it's because unlike its close lookalike, it opens to the sky. And that image just really, really has resonated with me this summer as I continue out on trails, opening to the sky. For me, I think movement has a way of opening me to the sky and to prayer and to others and to God when I want to be more constricted into myself. And so I share that because I'm so excited to hear from this group and from each of you tonight about the ways that movement threads through creation and your spiritual practices to help clear the way and to be able to see new life in and around us. And so I thought that we could take a few minutes and just have some time where if you feel open about sharing an activity or a movement outside that you enjoy, and either putting it into the chat or sharing it off mute with us, and then we'll go to the panelist discussion.
So my whole life, I've enjoyed running and being outside. For me, a 30-minute run is work, an hour run is peace. And we moved to West Seattle a year plus ago and have found, while I've always enjoyed running and found it peaceful, there's something different about running on the water as the sun comes up over Seattle. It's just a place that it doesn't matter what else is going on in the world. You just start the day the right way. It's a place of hope as the sun rises. So it's my place that I really enjoy.
So this summer, I haven't really had a chance to go hiking, but I've been walking in my neighborhood, also in West Seattle, but in the hills. And I go up to the top of the hills and this is more after work, so it's more about sunset and watching the sunset over the water from those hills. And then I go a different way all the time. And so I get to see different neighborhoods and all different kinds of trees. There's many trees here and many different kinds of gardens. And it's just very rejuvenating.
Looking at those slides where the trail led off into the future reminded me of what it's like in, or at least for me, in hiking, at the point at which your mind just turns off and there's nothing except the activity, the walking through the world and being part of the world. And that seems so precious to me, that understanding that it's not kind of me against the world, it's kind of like we're all a part of it together.
Well, those are all really great views, and I can just picture them as you're describing them. Thank you for sharing that. We have a great group of panelists tonight that we'll get to hear from and even maybe ask some additional questions about their favorite ways to move outside. And so I just want to introduce them tonight. So we have a couple of different motion and movements to go from a biking wheel perspective, which I'm sure they'll have different views even on that. We have Sarah Elwood, Earl Grout, and John Weller. From the water, we have Robert Stevens, paddles up. And then kind of two different forms of walking. We have Brother Paul Dalkey Christy likes to joke, Carlos in Seattle. That's what she put on the note for you, with different views. I just have to say for Paul, I always laugh because I see him in the most like random places walking. I mean, it's not just Capitol Hill. It can be the sculpture park. And I am having a picnic with friends and it's like, that's Paul. I have had oatmeal with him on Thursday mornings at 7 a.m. and there he is. And then we also have Nancy and Andy Vallis from a viewpoint of walking and being able to see nature up close. So thank you so much for joining. And so I'd like to just start with a question to you. And so Sarah, I'll start with you. Can you tell me a little bit about biking for you and what your connection is and being outside?
I think it took me many, many years to name what happens on a bike for me as prayer. And some of that I've come to recognize through the fact that it's something that I do almost every day. You know, in the days when we went to offices, you know, I've, excuse me, been a bicycle commuter my entire life. And so it is the way that I begin every day and I end every day, regardless more or less of what the weather is doing. And, you know, I guess it's no surprise as someone who's been drawn her whole life to liturgical faiths, that there is that element for me of the same paths traveled in the same ways with the same words over and over again. You know, that's one of the things that for me ushers in that stillness. And because it is the same path traveled in the same ways, you see the familiar in new ways. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm struck by the noticing sometimes of something that I've passed by hundreds of times to see it anew. And it sometimes feels like a sort of attention to and a smaller metaphor on life, because some days it is amazing and rich and meaningful, and other days it's simply hard. And to have that struggle and the energy or the body that will have that struggle feels like a gift sometimes on those days. So, you know, those are some just off the top of my head reflections on sort of that twice daily rhythm, you know, that has marked my life, you know, for, I don't know, probably 30 years now.
Yeah. Wow. And thinking about for you, Earl, I'll never forget when I first came to St. Mark's. I remember we had like an email thread or contact, and it was hard to schedule with you at first because you were going on some really big bike trip, and I was just I couldn't believe how many miles that you were putting in. But tell me a little bit more about biking for you and how that connects you outward and inward.
Oh, well, I started riding 35 years ago after periods of running, which is not good for your knees, as I found out, and swimming. And a lot of it, like with Sarah, was commuting. And then after retirement, I started doing some tours. The biggest was a cross-country tour, Virginia to Oregon, following the Trans Am route, which is the oldest and most well mapped. They all are now by Adventure Cycle. And 3 of us went from Virginia to Oregon in about almost 3 months. And we were self-supporting, so we had trailers and all that. And then I did several other tours after that, the longest being from Fargo, North Dakota, near where my wife's family lives, to Virginia, where one of my riding partners lives. And so being on the road like that's very different. Of that, I ride most days in the city, and thing about riding, this is especially true on a tour when you're out in the middle of the country. And anything you look at, you're going to see for a long time. So you have plenty of time to look at things. In the city, as well as in the country, there's a rhythm to this activity, running. That's why, who was it that said that an hour run is better than a half hour?
Yeah, Todd.
Todd, yeah, right. He's right. There's a rhythm to this with biking, especially because even if you're going up a hill or there's terrain changes, the pedaling gives you a rhythm, which basically is a type of meditation in itself. Just the body doing this rhythmic activity, and along with that is paying attention. If you don't want to find yourself glued to the back of a bus, it's a good idea to watch where you're going. So paying attention really helps. And paying attention means focus. And focus, of course, drives away a lot of distraction. But the rhythm also helps because you can pray with a rhythm. And the prayer I like to just repeat over and over so it actually becomes part of my pedaling is the Come Holy Spirit, Veni Sancte Spiritus. It goes really easy with something like this. And being outdoors where in the open air, even in the city, is refreshing. And you, like Sarah said, you start seeing things you didn't see before. And noticing things, especially natural things, flowers, trees, somebody's planters, things like that you see. And so it's nourishing that way. But I think the stillness of it comes from the meditative nature of the pedaling itself, of the rhythmic activity of biking. So that's how I find it actually sort of a spiritual thing. And then also you just can't do without it. I mean, you know, like the week of this, when we had all that smoke, I didn't ride, but nevertheless, you know, I'm out about, with the pandemic, I have a lot more time on my hands. So I'm riding over, since March, I've been riding over 100 miles a week. Well, that's not too hard to do when you got nothing else to do, you know, because all my Deacon stuff is on the shelf somewhere. So I got most of it anyway. So I got plenty of time. And this is the first time ever outside of being on those 2 long tours when I've ridden as much. Yesterday I passed 4,000 miles for the year, which is a lot. Because it's a little at a time. It's not like if you break it down into 5 days a week, you know, it's doable. It's just I have the time to do it. So this is an activity that's nourishing and in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, gives you a lot of stories for those miles, I'm sure too. A lot of moments.
Well, a lot of it's really repetitive right now, but it doesn't seem to matter either.
Yeah. Well, from another biking perspective, John, I know we haven't officially met, but I will never forget coming to the 8 a.m. service and seeing you in bike gear. I just thought that was so great that you could come confidently in bike gear to church and then be able to enjoy this beautiful ride like afterwards. And so I'm curious to learn more about biking for you and how you started and how it connects you to nature.
Yeah.
I probably started with many of my generation at about age 10 or 11 with a bicycle and joined a group of semi-nomadic boomers, young, mostly boys, but not entirely, who, you know, worked by the rule of be home before dark and don't bother me until then. So it came and went, but at a certain point in life here, I was able to concentrate on it more. I retired 11 years ago and realized that I would need a weekday family, that the team that I had built and the places that I did things, which are at Fort Lewis, Washington, weren't accessible once I was retired. There's nothing more pathetic than a retired person hanging around the office. So I needed something else to do, and I was adopted by some cyclists that I'd met through Cascade Bike Club and the Ride Leader program, and wound up riding with them a lot. And the list of things I had to do out of desperation, should I find myself a hermit in the house, is yet untapped because of cycling. And that is carried forward. You know, I think I mentioned in an email that there's a principle that I use, miles are meditation. That, as Earl said, after the ride starts, wherever it is, the details of life fall away. I ride almost entirely rural in the Snoqualmie River Valley and north of Monroe, and most of my rides start on the east side and go further east. So traffic isn't usually a problem, and traffic lights aren't a problem. There's usually not a lot of stops. So there's time for the rhythm to set in, and then begin to notice the details of life have dropped away. The details of what I'm passing through have taken over. Now the cycles of the seasons change. You know, well, look, skunk cabbage, it must be going to be spring soon. Or the aspen betrays us and in mid-August starts dropping leaves, and you can say, well, I better soak this up while I can. And I learned from Peter Strymer when he was on staff at St. Mark's. He was the one who I first heard refer to Meister Eckhart, and his saying to the effect that our real duty is to give thanks. And that becomes easy on a bicycle because there's things to be thankful about all the time passing by that never seem to get old. So it's not hard to connect. You know, the cycles of the year and the rules of physics to the designed environment that we live in, especially this beautiful designed environment, and be thankful to the Creator for what we have to pass through, whether we're in a hurry or not.
Yeah, and we're certainly getting a sense of timing in this year of pace. Robert, I'm curious about your view from the water. How did that start for you, and what are you finding out there? I think you may be on mute.
And actually, this would go with what I just said, being on mute. My three older brothers would have loved to put me on mute. I just said that I'm the youngest of four boys, not the most athletic of the four boys. And a sport that I could do was swimming, because it wasn't a team sport necessarily. And I've always been attracted to water. And so I was a swimmer. And for a period of my adult life, I lived in Hawaii and worked in Hawaii. And after work, every day I would either go down to Ala Moana. I lived on Oahu and lived in Honolulu. And I'd go down to Ala Moana, Art of Queens Beach, and I would do laps in the ocean. And then when I moved back to Seattle, and for a while I would swim at Madison Park Beach, but I would always stop in the wintertime because I wasn't really into open water swimming, a little bit too cold. And this year during the pandemic, which I'll talk about a little bit later, my husband and I were looking for something that we could do together. And as a kid, I did canoeing, so we took up kayaking. It was a way to connect with the water, which I'm very drawn to water. I love being in water, being around water. It's a baptismal thing, I think. It's freeing, it's life-giving. And this summer as well, besides kayaking, I'm actually doing laps in Lake Washington again. So I'm looking at buying a wetsuit so I can swim during the fall and winter. It's just a connection with creation and the earth. And as you're swimming, it's rhythmic. You still have to be conscious of what you're doing because you don't want to drown, obviously, because there's nobody to help you. But it's prayerful. And what about the kayaking piece for Carlos and I? it was something that we could do together. And I'm more into active prayer. And we'll kayak somewhere and observe. Then we'll stop and we'll talk to each other about what we've seen, what we've experienced. Then we'll kayak some more because we have individual kayaks. God forbid we'd be in the same kayak. That might be a little bit too much. And we tried working from home together and that did not go well. And that's actually brought us closer together. And it's something that we could do together. That took us into nature. And he has a connection to water as well. And you also meet people out on the water as well, kayakers and canoers and paddlers. There's a lot of people that you wouldn't meet otherwise. And it's a level of stillness, even though it's active, that I've never experienced. In swimming, I've experienced my spirituality, but I've never experienced it in an activity like kayaking. And I'm really looking forward to it this wintertime.
Different types of connection.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, for you and walking Seattle, like what have you noticed, and have you always been walking oriented?
I would say I've always been walking oriented, but in my youth I was a bike racer for 15 years, so there's some similarities to that. But I guess 14 years ago I started working in downtown, and I just said I'm not going to drive to work. So I bused and then walked to work. And so I already had a habit there. And then 5 years ago, we moved to right in downtown Seattle. I'm at 2nd and Pike. And so I walk everywhere. And it's really, it's part of the Franciscan stuff is, to try and get outside into nature. And it's a very easy way to do it. It's also a good way to be totally inefficient with your time. But when I first started doing it, it was just go to church and back. And that's still sort of what the primary thing was, since I have 5 different parishes throughout downtown I go to, I do get around. But it really turned into, a lot of people say, you really notice the seasons, even though I'm walking the same routes, it's different every single day. And then I really noticed it's a huge witness. And then it's a huge ministry. I've talked to thousands of strangers and got to know people on the streets. And then you see the people on the margins and get to know them and work with the people that are, the addicts and the alcoholics and the mentally ill and, our first responders and all that stuff. And, there's lots of opportunities to pray for these type of people, or anytime you hear a siren or see a siren, which is constantly downtown, it's, an opportunity. But it's also, slows the whole day down, and it's nice to have time to yourself to think, but it's nice to have a nice, calm 30-minute walk, and then you go to morning prayer, and then you can have, a 30-minute walk home where you reflect on morning prayer. I love it. I plan to do a lot more. I've been walking a ton now, and I got laid off. And next year, I'm hoping to walk the Pacific Crest Trail. So I'm going to do a pilgrimage in the wilderness and walk 2,600 miles. We'll see if that happens with all the things going on in the world. That's a little bit about my walking.
Yeah, I'm curious though. I found that sometimes you can walk or run or bike faster around Seattle than driving in Seattle. So your inefficiency may have been more efficient in some ways at times. I know that
it's constant year round. St. Mark's is 40 minutes away, whether it be New Year's at midnight when the roads are completely packed with partiers, or, there's a Seahawks game. It's always consistent, but, definitely times driving or the bus would be faster.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Andy and Nancy, I would love to hear a little bit about some of your walks that you've had in this time of pandemic. You've seemed to find nature even when we can't go a lot of places, and what that's meant for you.
Yes, we are probably strollers would be the right thing to say. In pre-pandemic, we did day hikes in the mountains. But at this point, we're strollers. Probably we are missing the mountains very much. In the mountains, we found that we could leave the changes and chances of everyday life and find the stillness and a sense of majesty and awe. The beauty of nature is very, very spiritual for me. A sense of gratitude for the beauty of nature. Kind of putting yourself, knowing where your place is in the universe. You can't be a Rainier without knowing that you're part of something much larger. Other things people have mentioned, paying attention. We find that as we walk, we pay attention, in particular these days, where we are pretty much just walking in the neighborhood. It's the tiny things that we're finding, the leaves that are turning, the berries on the bushes, the smell of the leaves this morning. We smelled fall. Let's see. Oh, and gratitude for having a body. It is a joy to have a body that moves in God's world. And there's rejoicing in it. Now I'll let Andy.
Well, I have a slight variation on hiking, which is, this is pre-pandemic, but I've been volunteering with the Washington Trails Association, working on trail crews. And it has all the advantages of hiking in that you're out in the woods and it's quiet. And a number of people previously had mentioned getting into a rhythm, just the motion. In this case, it's just one shovelful of dirt at a time. And at the end of the day, you're physically tired. The trail is in better shape than when you started in the morning, or if you're building new trail, there's another 20 feet of trail that wasn't there in the morning. It's an opportunity to be with a community of people, and it's a service.
Thank you for sharing. We've shared a few examples of this and talking about the activities that are meaningful for you outside. What are some moments, if you'd be willing to share, in which you felt like the closest connection to presence or to God, or just things around you? Like, do you have any specific memories or moments that come to mind? And this would be for any of the panelists, if you want to start.
I say I've had thousands of encounters with strangers, and a lot of them are just blessings or completely random things. Like a stranger just walks up and hands you $20 bills and says, thank you. To incredibly challenging things that are dealing with very, violent or people that are not rational. And so you get a very wide breadth of experiences, and I always see God in those experiences. Whoever that person is or whatever, there's always some lesson to be taught there. And for me, it's always very obvious. If I wasn't outdoors walking around, I would never have this encounter and have this lesson or this blessing.
I guess I would say that for me, it's not one specific moment so much as a repeated moment of, in any kind of motion through space and time, that the shock and surprise of arriving to that moment of stillness and wonder. It is utterly surprising and unpredictable, and yet I believe that it will come. I wasn't always biking. I started competing as a distance runner when I was about 10. And I can remember the first time that I was ever experienced that space of just utter stillness in motion that was beyond what I can really know or explain. And I feel like I've spent the whole rest of my life chasing that. And when it comes and how it comes in motion is not something that I understand or control, but it is showing up to the possibility that I guess for me is one of the ways that the presence of God comes.
And there's it's a quote from Richard Rohr in his book Universal Christ that resonates with me. God loves things by becoming them. Getting out of and some would say that's panentheistic. That could get me into trouble. Maybe not. Getting outside of the four
We are
wall-
recording. No, I'm just kidding.
yes.
I forgot to mention that.
Getting outside of the four walls of our condo, being in creation. God is in all of creation, experiencing all of God's love in creation, and seeing creation, and not just being within four walls. That's one of the unexpected gifts of the pandemic, is being outside of the four walls of the cathedral, even though I miss it beyond belief. But one of the gifts is not being in the four walls and experiencing community and experiencing sacrament outside of the four walls, and knowing that sacrament is beyond the four walls. And that's a gift that I hope I never forget now. And being in the water, for me, is that baptismal rebirth. Every time I'm in the water, it happens. It's that connection.
This is a curveball question. I didn't share it in advance. In a little context, I know for me, like I don't like to drive, and my husband usually drives, and so I get to be the navigator. And sometimes I get into trouble because he'll say, "Emily, I need driving directions, not running directions," because I'll try not to use the GPS and go from memory. And I've taken him to this dead end road, but I'm like, but I can run there and go that way. And I share that because I can often be a planner in my non-movement space. And so I find that running just without a route, like just making it up as I go, is a very freeing part of the experience. And so I'm just curious for the group of panelists, if in your activity, do you find that you find order and structure and like planning, like John, like when you went to Cle Elum this weekend, like did you plan a route, or do you have kind of wiggle room in it? Like how do you balance planning where you want to go and then also creating space for coming up with a route or where you're going? So there was a question in that, but do you like to plan your route or leave room for creativity?
I would add to your comment about navigating by riding routes that that often I find that I have to drive somewhere and I need to back off and think about that because I know how to get there on a bicycle, but I'm not sure, you know, that that's going to be the best way to get there if all I have to do is drive. When I'm picking routes, it had, you know, the one of the drivers is this going to have if all goes well enough, not perfectly because that doesn't happen, but well enough, will this have been worth getting there and getting back? And so it has to do with what terrain, what vegetation, what sites I'll have, and then how much time do I have, which drives how long I can go, how far will I ride, and then, you know, getting there, doing the job, and getting back. It's really driven by I have a certain amount of time, and I can do a certain number of things on that time with that time, and you know, riding from Cle Elum to Thorpe and back on a loop around the I-90 axis, but not on the interstate, feeds, you know, the reasons that I go there to ride. Just the same as riding from Fall City to Carnation up or down the Snoqualmie Valley. There are things there that I'm after that I find most times. And then the surprise delights, the Easter eggs. Is it clear enough to go to a certain place and see Mount Baker? You know, we're standing by the side of the road in the Snoqualmie Valley between Fall City and Carnation. I'm looking 96 miles to the summit of Mount Baker. Those kind of gifts, you know, I call them, are especially where Meister Eckhart territory, where there's time for copious thanks for the opportunity to be here and then the revelations that it brings. But the bottom line, the first line is, you know, what can I get done? Can I rope anybody else into going along? But what can I get done in this time, in this place?
Thank you.
I sort of borrowed something from my sister. She's been running with a group and they have one rule is they find a new route every single run. And I do the same routes, but I took on a case, well, I got to see something new every single time I walk down the same path. And it's really easy to do, I found out, because you know, I do it at the same time of the day and the sun comes up different every day and the seasons are different every day. Or if you want to see something new, is just look up the trees or the skyscraper, you always see something new. So it's even though I walk the same routes, I always find new, unique things to see every day.
I find I need them both, Emily. You know, I deeply need the path routinely traveled, and yet a thing that I have come to understand is regularly my heart will suddenly demand to be let loose and go from A to B in a way that I have never been. And I never know when that's going to happen, but I know that it will happen. And they both seem essential somehow.
And then sometimes Seattle construction just makes you go into this mode by default. You get to plan and be creative. Well, Earl, you mentioned this a little bit in your introduction around ramping up miles during this time. I'm curious if you have any other surprises that are related to biking during a pandemic, or what it's been like for you in having that extra time on the road.
Well, I was thinking about what Paul said, using the same routes. Since I ride in the city, I don't experiment. It's safer to have routes that are common, well-traveled. And so I have several of them. And we live near the Burt Gilman Trail, and that's a connector, so I can go on and off of that. But I have a number of routes, probably 5 or 6, that are common. And it's kind of like when you're thinking of your week and planning your week, you'll say, well, I think Thursday is going to be a Magnolia day. And so I can anticipate and feel the whole thing, you know, before I start, so I can experience it as familiar, but then you see new things and meet people. that are different. And then another thing about it is that because you have time and you're out there more, you do see people. I remember being on Mercer Island, one of my rides around Mercer Island, or doing the two bridges, you come up on this big play field where there's a bathroom. And of course, geezers like me always like to stop at bathrooms. So I'm sitting there taking a break, and here's this guy about 90 years old coming up this hill. And I'm sitting on a bench, and I said, well, would you like the bench? And he says, yeah, sure. So he noticed my Navy jersey. And he said, well, were you in the Navy? I said, yeah. And I said, were you in the armed forces? And he said, yeah, I was he was a navigator on a B-29 in World War II. And this guy, so tell me your story. It was really interesting listening to this guy. And I found that I always wear an armed forces jersey because I'm a veteran and want to recognize veterans. And it's been interesting because people tell you their stories, or their father's stories, or their son's stories, or daughters, or whatever. So it's biking like that offers a way of connecting with people too. And then you see more, like I mentioned, out in the country, whatever you see, you're going to look at for a long time. Well, it's almost true in the city too, especially if you're on common routes. And what happens is, I'm not a fast rider. I like Satchel Paige's advice: start out slow and taper off. So basically, it's safer that way, but then you see things that you would not see in a car. I keep noticing that you see little things. A lot of times it's little things. It could be flowers by the side of the road, or if you're riding down to Seward Park, the trees, when they change color, it's an experience seeing that, or the lake and what the lake looks like, or the wind. And you can pay attention to that because you're not really moving very fast. And that's, I think, a way of connecting to see in ways that you don't see when you're in a car.
We tend to walk the same route, at least since the pandemic. In the neighborhood, we're very fortunate in that we have a route that goes past a wetlands and then up through an abandoned road. And we've had the fun of last spring watching the buds come, and then the leaves, and enjoying all the leaves all summer. And now we're saying farewell to the leaves as they begin to turn and fall. So it's been marvelous to really get to know this route and to watch it change through the seasons.
And I was going to circle back to Emily's question about, are we planners or not planners? Well, pre-pandemic hiking, it always helps to know which trailhead we are headed to, because if you don't know, you can spend a lot of time circling around in the car, and the Cascades are huge. But once we get there, we let go of specific goals and just get out and walk and enjoy the walking and losing ourselves in the walking.
And seeing what new things, what surprises, where that marmot is going to pop up.
We joke about the Mount Rainier marmots being on shift because they're pretty reliable.
They can range in such size. I have been quite amazed at how large a marmot can be. But fun little creatures. Well, I want to be able to transition to breakout rooms and to give you some questions and things to reflect on. We're in this pandemic year, and how do you relate to activity differently during the pandemic? And I think there's a lot of different ways that we can think about that question as it relates to the year. Certainly with the pandemic, we've had restrictions in going outside. And then recently we've had an experience of not being able to go outside because of air quality for many. But there are other areas that movement relates to this as well. Like not everyone has the opportunity to choose to move freely or to feel safe being outside based on different circumstances. And then certainly there's an economic piece as well that we consider. And so I invite you to explore this question of movement during a pandemic that's brought up a lot of challenging issues, and how you find hope or connection in that encounter. And so Kelly is going to put us into breakout rooms, and then we'll just take about 12 minutes or so in our group and gather back around, well, that would be too specific. Maybe we'll gather back at 8:10. 12 minutes would put us at like 8:08, and that just doesn't feel generous enough. So let's do 8:10 and gather back of what we've shared. And so you should be momentarily receiving a breakout room session, and if you will join that, we'll get moving.
All right, you should be getting an invitation.
And we're back. Well, we wanted to take a few minutes and just hear what are some of the things that came up in your conversation of a theme or something that was impactful for you. If anyone would like to share.
Well, it took us a little while, not long, but a little while to settle into our foursome, you know, the mics and the muting and not unmuting and stuff. But then as we started talking, it was almost like poetry. A couple of words that came up, one was puttering, puttering outside in the yard. That too is movement. And then the realization that our bodies inside are always moving, you know, even though we can settle and we can get to this stillness, peace, or touch it sometimes, but our bodies are always moving, the organs, you know, the blood moving through. And anyway, it was poetic, I would say.
I have a button that says, it may not look like I'm doing anything, but at a cellular level, I'm very busy.
One of the things that came up maybe unexpectedly in our group was the power of imagination and memory, that even during times when we might not be able to be outside or in a favorite place physically doing our favorite thing, we can bring it to mind and take pleasure from that and anticipate the next times that we'll be able to do it.
Or we would repeat routes. So we had favorite places. And so I do that. And Brother John, is it? Was doing that also. That you discover new things every time on a so going back to where you've already been is always.
Were there any particular places that came up that were those places for you?
Well, for me, bike routes, Robert talked about water, and a lot of my routes, I'm sorry, it was Brother Paul, right? Are around water. And you see things differently when you're like on a floating bridge, or favorite places would be go to Golden Gardens and sit, take a break and look out at the sound. Or Magnolia, I always stop at the very top of that hill and sit on this bench and look out at my, you know. So a lot of my favorite places have to do with water. Seattle's really good with that. That's why the traffic's so bad. But you know, but if you're walking or on a bike, you know, it's a good thing.
I felt like it's been really lovely to have to hear from a couple of couples in the ways that sort of in movement and in movement together, you're sort of in relation with one another, as well as with creation, motion, because you're collaborating around the thing that you're doing. And so that was a lovely part of our conversation.
One of the things that came up in our group was just the awareness of how lucky we are to be able to be in creation, and how much we want to be able, out of response of that gratitude, to be able to take care of it in a way that we're able to enjoy it and not just be in our Zoom boxes. And like, what are the ways in which, like, if we feel connection to creation and trees and water and clean air, but other people don't have that same connection, like what are ways that we can help to build that connection, so it doesn't even feel like a choice, but as a way of relating differently through the way that we live and model creation stewardship.
And it was just a pleasure to be with people who care about this. What a lovely community.
One of the people in our group talked about the transition from walking to a destination and then the transition to having walking be just a walking meditation. And I've thought about that ever since she said it, because that seems like such a wonderful transition, and I'm so far away from that. That place of walking as meditation. But it certainly seems something to emulate in the days when we don't necessarily walk to a destination. Some people walk to work still, the rest of us just walk.
And I think that brings up a point that, as we were thinking about this conversation and planning for it, that we really wanted to be able to share, is that there are more formal activities in which you can practice movement and biking and kayaking or running or trail running or whatever it is. But there doesn't have to be a formality about it. It can be in the awareness of just basic movements, and even within breath and watching and being, or the cellular, as Earl said. And so we hope that it's given you some ways to be able to think about that in your life and space right now, as we think about movement and what it can bring to you and to others as well. And so as part of that, we really wanted you to feel like that you had some opportunities to be able to encounter and connect and reflect after this. And so Kylie is going to lead us into kind of a resource document that we'll send out after, that gives us some ideas about various ways that we can connect to movement, in which many of you have contributed in some way or not. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Emily, for facilitating us in such a rich discussion, and to everybody for contributing and sharing stories and their activities that they participate in. It's really wonderful to hear all of that. So I am going to share a document that we created. Let's see if I can do this correctly. So this is a resource document that we created. Let me know if you cannot see it. So this is our Wonder in Creation Mindful Steps resource document. You can see here we've got 3 different columns that outline a resource, so the what, a link for where to find that resource, the where, and then a description of what that resource is. And I'm going to try and click into one of these. So a couple of examples that really spoke to me within this document is the first one, what walking, let's see, is it this first one? Yes, what walking taught me about environmentalism. So if you click into here, when you're in the document, it'll bring you, that did not work. We will go back and try again. How hiking can help your spirituality. Here we go. So it'll bring you to a page where you can read this wonderful article about hiking and spirituality. This particular article speaks to, I believe it was Nancy was talking previously about being in nature can really help you identify how small you may feel in the universe, or how big you might feel in comparison to an ant or a beautiful little flower. But this article really gets you in touch with nature, the beauty of nature, and spirituality within nature. So that's how the document works as far as resources goes. Another really great example here, and we've broken this down into categories. So that's under the read category, what you can read in terms of movement and spirituality. You can learn. So the Mountaineers Club is a wonderful organization. It's actually a 501c3 nonprofit organization where you can participate in activities. There are wonderful volunteers there that teach classes as well. And you can really explore the Pacific Northwest where we live, and learn about conservation as well. So we've got another section called ACT, and this is a section that focuses on another area. So Seattle Stairway Walks, if you click into that, will guide you to various walks that incorporate stairways. So you can get to know, you can see on this example where the picture is, take a few stairs, visit certain neighborhoods, get in touch with nature. You can do that with somebody or by yourself. So it's a wonderful opportunity to participate in an actual activity that way. There's another section where you can invest. So if you want to put your money to good use, Outdoors for All is a wonderful organization that offers up outdoor activities for children and adults with disabilities. So you've got volunteers taking people bicycling or say kayaking, for example, as people were talking about. So this is a great organization that really speaks to me. And I used to work with them when I did some nonprofit work. And then areas to connect, you've got, I think somebody mentioned Washington Trails Association. I've used this a ton over the course of this summer to identify trails to hike, how long they are, their difficulty level, where they're located, directions to them. So that's a wonderful resource and way to connect as well. So this resource document is a great opportunity to select any particular things that you want to get involved in or participate in, or for example, in this section, reflect. You can read certain sections of the Bible, you can read certain books, and we'll share this out after the session. So I'll leave this up while I say a few words. And then I do definitely want to get into a little bit more sharing as well. So just to recap a little bit in terms of mindful steps, as we've been discussing as a spiritual practice, is in any number of ways a form of worship, a form of prayer, a form of honoring our stewardship and honoring God and all in God's creation. So in whatever actions we choose to do, we can bring these to an elevated level of consciousness or spiritual practice, as we've been discussing, within ourselves and potentially those around us. So much of what we do individually ties into the community at large. And all of this gives us a great opportunity to ask ourselves questions like, in what ways can I be a part of caring for creation in general or specifically through mindful steps? What do these practices mean to me in the current context, and where do I find hope? These are important questions to ask. So I ask that each of you, during and after this session is over, to come up with 3 actions based on what you learned or heard tonight or something from this resource list that you're viewing right now that you're going to tackle or work on. Think about what you're drawn to. Right now, though, we'd love to hear from a few people who would be open to sharing one action you're willing to tackle or one thing that gives you hope. So we'd love to hear your ideas on that. And if you prefer to, feel free to put your ideas in the chat box. And if you haven't had an opportunity yet to say something, now is a great time to share your ideas with the group. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you all, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see everybody. So yeah, I'll just turn the floor over to you all to share an action or a hope that you have. So I'll mute. And if you want, I can get us started. So an action that I plan on tackling is when things open back up. I do want to get involved with Outdoors for All. So take an opportunity to volunteer and go bicycling with folks who have varying abilities. So for me, that would be a really strong action that that I do plan on taking. And it gives me hope because it really offers up a sense of community and getting in touch with nature and being closer to God's creation.
Kelly mentioned Girls on the Run in the chat, and I know that's an organization I volunteered with and have been a running buddy. And I tell you, like, seeing a girl that you worked with and avoiding running at all costs during practices cross a finish line, I mean, it is more rewarding than any race I've ever qualified for, and it is pretty empowering. It's a good organization. And then Nancy shared that she plans to vote with Creation Care as a value, thinking about an action that we can have. And Sud is thinking about yoga with limited mobility and on pilgrimage. And so one of the resources on pilgrimage where it talks about this idea that we mentioned earlier, that walking to just ordinary places can be pilgrimage when we have a lot of flight restrictions. So, And we'll make sure to send this out in a follow-up email, and then also include some of the additional resources like Julia mentioned with the Seattle Parks. And I know in our group, there were a couple of podcasts that were mentioned and some poems as well. So I think it's helpful in the sharing of things that bubble up for you, because it makes those more meaningful when we listen. And then also Marjorie is going to check out some inspirational books involving nature. And there's actually a plug. I actually thought about Marjorie yesterday reading the New York Times, because there's 5 recommended climate books that I can include that seem really well done, that they called out. And then Sue is going to try to find a group to help get out in nature. So now we're wrapping down to time, but we do thank you so much for coming, and we want to close in a word of prayer. So I'm going to turn that back to Kylie.
Thank you, Emily. Let us pray. Thank you, God, for the rising sun. You've granted me another day. Your grace is amazing. Bless you, faithful Lord. The creation sings your praise, and I join the sound. Heal my tired soul, restore my aching bones. Lead each step along my path today. Ease my burdens as I press forward. Quench my thirst with your living streams. Like the cool morning breeze, your peace refreshes me. Steady me on the slippery slopes. Release me from the ropes that bind me, that hold me back. Protect me from the viper that hides. Lift me up from the shadowy valley. The peak is almost in sight. I'm rising above this world. Into your country I long to go. Bless my companions who travel with me. The trail is rugged and narrow, but you are right beside me. Thank you, God, my trusted guide. Glory to your holy name. Amen.
Thank you. And thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you for taking time and for sharing your passions. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, for facilitating us for all the evening.
Yes, and I said a prayer for you today, Sarah. Rain Pants Day for sure. I thought if we were commuting today, we would pass each other like ducks in a pond.
It's the Rain Pants dance.
Yes.
The only thing that's uncooler than my rain pants is my dance.
That was the only way I got excited about wearing rain pants when I first moved to Seattle, was the rain pants dance. So Sarah and I have been able to connect on that. But it's true, it's a real thing. So try it if you don't want to wear rain pants.
It helps.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you, guys. Thanks so much.
Bye.